Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So we're currently in a bit of an interesting situation here in Toronto. The first thing I just really want to say is stay safe, watch the news, listen to your public health authority and officials, and if you're feeling sick, don't go out. Now, before we get started, if you're not already, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our next video and so that you can see more videos like this. Now for the main content. So today what we're going to be discussing is the top 10 stations in Toronto, or really the greater Toronto region. One thing that annoys me often is when we're talking about cities, we just talk about, the city proper. When I say Vancouver, often people think just Vancouver proper or Toronto proper. But the reality is that when you're talking about urbanism and urban areas, you really have to look at the metro area. And so I'm talking about the top 10 stations in the Toronto metro area, and they're really important in terms of the metro area because many people don't live in Toronto, and connectivity means that you need to have great stations that aren't necessarily in the city of Toronto itself. So essentially what I did was I looked at the number of modes connecting at each station, the number of different lines and the coverage of those different lines, as well as the number of different operators at each station, and I compiled a list of the top 30, of which I'm going to talk about the top 10 stations in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. So at number 10, we have Spadina. Now, Spadina is a station that isn't actually that regionally significant. It's quite important in Toronto itself, as it's a connection between Line 1 as well as Line 2 and the Spadina streetcar. Now, Spadina is a bit of an awkward transfer point between the Line 2 and Line 1 subways, since there's quite a long tunnel and Line 1 is probably a couple hundred meters away from Line 2 for the connection. However, it's a great place to transfer from Line 2 onto the Spadina streetcar, and it offers kind of great connectivity to the western end of Toronto's downtown core. So Spadina is definitely one of the most important stations in the region. Next up at number 9 is Vaughan Metropolitan Centre. Now, a lot of people were really skeptical when Vaughan Metropolitan Centre opened. It's a station that was in the middle of basically a bunch of big box industrial areas and strip malls and such, and so people just didn't think it was going to be successful. Now, Vaughan Metropolitan Centre has had a decent amount of success out of the York Region stations on the new Toronto-York Spadina subway extension. Now, a lot of that has unfortunately been because of a large number of parking lots and parkades that have allowed people to basically park and ride their cars using Vaughan Metropolitan Centre as a station. However, it's been really exciting to see a lot of new service and a lot of densification happen. When I was recently at Vaughan Metropolitan Centre, we saw a number of new towers, as well as the new Smart Centres bus terminal, which I believe has been renamed Smart VMC or something like that, had all opened up. It's definitely one of the nicest bus terminals in Toronto, and you also have a great bus station for Viva, which is actually directly on Highway 7, which means that Viva services are super direct and super fast through Vaughan Metropolitan Centre. You also have connections at Vaughan Metropolitan Centre, that's a mouthful, to Brampton on the Zoom BRT light system, which is really awesome to see. So it's just a great kind of hub between Western York Region, Eastern Brampton, as well as on Jane, because a lot of people connecting to Vaughan Mills Shopping Centre, as well as Canada's Wonderland, would be doing so via the Jane bus route, which has actually been very successful as of late and connects right into that new bus terminal. Along with all that new development, it's just awesome to see a regional center which is kind of moving in the right direction in terms of less car-oriented and more high density outside of the city of Toronto. Next up at number 8 is Kitchener Central Station. Now, you might be wondering, Kitchener should it really qualify as one of the top stations? But there's a lot of reasons I think it should. Now, Kitchener Central Station is currently a little less than what it will be in the future because the region of Waterloo has planned a pretty significant transit hub that will largely replace the now closed Charles Street bus terminal in the region for kind of local bus connections. You also already have ION's Central Station operating in this location, as well as GO trains, which will be moved into the new transit hub in the future. Now, once you see that two-way all-day GO connection, as well as, again, further GO buses, etc., it will be a really great connector for the region of Waterloo to the rest of the Greater Toronto and Hamilton region. Ideally, that means future buses going south directly to Hamilton as well. One great addition we'll also be seeing is that introduction of two-way all-day GO train service, which should be at least every 2 hours initially, and ideally becomes at least every hour and perhaps even every half hour in the future. Of course, the other awesome thing in this location is a lot of new density at King and Victoria. At the intersection there you have new condos, new retail, some educational stuff with the University of Waterloo, as well as Google's Canadian headquarters, which is a really awesome building. So yeah, Kitchener Central is very underrated and definitely one of the most important stations, not just now, but in the future. It will be increasingly important in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton region. At number 7, this station is Mount Dennis. Now, Mount Dennis is a station that probably isn't in the minds of a lot of Torontonians because currently it appears nowhere on the subway map and it doesn't have necessarily a major bus route associated with it like streets such as Dufferin and Jane and Steeles and Finch do. But Mount Dennis is going to be a really critical connection point once the Eglinton Crosstown opens. Not only is Mount Dennis going to have GO train connections and Up Express connections, but it will also host a major TTC bus terminal, and it's kind of our expectation that we might see some MyWay services going to Mount Dennis instead of Kipling in the future, because it kind of offers a nice connection a little further to the north than Kipling, kind of along the Midtown Toronto corridor. Now further in the future, once the Eglinton West LRT opens, Mount Dennis will be even more important because it will be a connection point for both services from Pearson, so that's the Eglinton West LRT and the Up Express. And it's just an awesome location in general. You have the Eglinton Crosstown maintenance and storage facilities, the awesome building that was brought in from the former Kodak lands that's been repurposed as part of the station house, and then just a lot of interesting new amenities provided by the City of Toronto. So indeed, Mount Dennis is a really important station for the future of the city and our next hub. Next up at number 6, so that's Finch. Now, Finch is currently a station that is kind of, I would say, underrated in terms of its importance. The reality is that essentially in the future, when the Yonge subway is extended up further into York region, I think Finch will play a much smaller role, but currently it's an incredibly important hub. Not only is the Finch Avenue corridor incredibly important in terms of bus routes, but in the future we'll probably also see the Finch West LRT extended to the east, I guess making it just the Finch LRT, at which point it will also interchange with Line 1 at Finch. The station also has significant 24-hour service on streets such as Yonge and Finch and Steeles as well. As well as that, you also have kind of a regional terminal that hosts Viva, YRT, and GO buses. Those services go everywhere from Yorkdale to Pearson, to Highway 401 East, to Richmond Hill Center, to the Highway 7 Viva routes, as well as farther north. So you just have a ton of connectivity at Finch right now. And it's also an interesting area because you have a lot of density and connections to the station. So Finch is a super important station. At number 5, so next up is Kipling. Now Kipling, much like Mount Dennis, is a station that, while quite important now, will be even more important in the future. And now why is that? Well, currently, Kipling already is super important because it serves a lot of TTC routes, including the Airport Rocket route, which connects people from the subway system to Toronto Pearson International Airport 24 hours a day. So it's a really critical location for that. But in the future, Kipling becomes an even more important regional hub. Now, to be clear, there's already Milton Line services at Kipling, but since it's our expectation that the Milton Line gets even more service in the future, ideally eventually all-day two-way service, Kipling will be a really important hub and connection for people coming from the west to get onto Line 2 and perhaps go somewhere on Bloor-Danforth corridor. You also have the greatly expanded transit hub, which we have done a video on in the past, that's currently being constructed at Kipling. What that's going to mean is a lot more accessibility for GO buses, again serving that Milton corridor, which is incredibly important because it's the closest thing we have to a direct train between the downtown core of Toronto and Mississauga, which is obviously basically becoming the region's second downtown core hub. You're also going to see MyWay services moved from Islington over to this new bus terminal, so Kipling will just become a very important station on the western end of the TTC in the future. Now next up on the other side of the Bloor-Danforth line, and at number 4, we have Kennedy. Now Kennedy is already quite important. It hosts connections between Line 2, Line 3, as well as the Stouffville line, and a number of buses, similar to Kipling on the west. Of course though, Kennedy is also becoming much more important in the future, as it's going to be a very interesting station which connects both of our major east-west rail routes, the Eglinton Crosstown and Line 2. Essentially at Kennedy, what you're going to have is connections between the Stouffville line, which goes north and south, and then two of our primary east-west rail corridors, meaning that you can easily go from Kennedy to Midtown Toronto, as well as the northern end of downtown, which is really fantastic from a connectivity point of view. The only thing that I really think that Kennedy is currently lacking is more density. There's a bit, but it's kind of disappointing given the amount of significant transit connections available at the station. Now, next up at number 3, we have Main Street Danforth. And I call stations where there's a GO and TTC connection, even if it's a short walking connection, I like to call them, the first is the TTC name, and then you just say the GO station name, because I think it's really obtuse and silly that we have separate names for a station which we essentially want to think of as one hub. In the future, I hope that single names are adopted for these stations, but indeed I'm going to call it Main Street Danforth. Now, Main Street Danforth is super important because it's a connection between Line 2, several bus routes, as well as the streetcars on the eastern end of the city. Now, of course, you also have a connection to GO at this station, and that connects you to the Lakeshore East and Stouffville line corridors, both of which are already two-way all-day week-long services, and the Lakeshore East is a service that is very frequent, so there's a lot of awesome connectivity at this station. Now, much like Kennedy, we do want to see more density, and eventually what would be awesome to see is some sort of underground connection between the GO station and the TTC station. It's not something that I think is really actively planned, but it would be an awesome connection, and it would really turn these two semi-separate stations into one significant transit hub. You might have guessed it, but in the number 2 space we have Dundas West Bloor. Again, Dundas West Bloor. TTC, GO. The great thing about Dundas West is there's just so much going on in the area. And in a lot of ways, it kind of shows you what a station like Mount Dennis could be like in the future. Not only do you have GO services, but again, you also have those Up Express services, which are highly frequent. You also have Milton Line trains passing through Dundas West, which means that in the future, perhaps, say the Milton Line does get that fantastic all-day service, we could actually see Milton Line trains stop here at Dundas West, and that would just provide even better connectivity. Imagine people want to go somewhere from the Milton Line to Pearson or to Woodbine in the future. Having this connection point would mean they don't have to go all the way downtown to get that connection, and that would be fantastic in terms of reducing the number of transfers, because right now, if you want to make that transfer, you're going to have to get off at Kipling and then ride Line 2 to Dundas West, where you will see the same Milton Line train already passing through the station and just not stopping. Of course, Dundas West is also super important because not only does it host a small TTC subway yard, the Vincent Yard, but it also has a number of bus connections and streetcars, and we love streetcars. Not many stations in the overall network have so many modes connecting them. At Dundas West Bloor, you quite literally have GO trains, Up Express, streetcars, bus, TTC subway, bike share. You have pretty much every mode you could possibly want at this station. And something that's awesome that we're seeing at Dundas West that we're not seeing at stations like Kennedy and Main Street is that there's actually a lot of demand and planning for more development. And you have things like the West Toronto Rail Path. It just feels more urban than a location like Main Street and Kennedy. And so we just love this station. And we think it's going to kind of become the city's primary western hub in the future outside of Union Station. Again, making things possible, such as transfers from Line 2 onto the Kitchener line, or Milton to Up, or Milton to Kitchener. Just lots of awesome connection options. And in the future, perhaps even connections like the Milton line to Kitchener to the Line 5 Eglinton route. So there's just lots of interesting options at this station in the future, and we think it's second most important in the entire region. Now, finally at number 1, you probably guessed it because this station is just massive. When we're looking in terms of scores, I can roughly summarize that all other stations are actually relatively close in terms of scores when you consider the number of routes and the coverage and number of places you can get to from that single station. But Union Station is more than double the connectivity of any other station in the entire city. And so it's just a super significant hub. Not only does Union have connections to the TTC subway, as well as buses and the streetcar, just like Dundas West, but it has connections to all 7 GO lines, as well as the Up Express. Beyond just that, it also has a significant GO bus terminal that offers bus connections all over the region. Now in the future, an enhanced GO bus terminal inside of CIBC Square might actually hold the intercity bus connections for Toronto, relocating from the Toronto coach terminal on Dundas, at which point Union becomes like the single most important hub in the entire nation. It's really already the single most important hub in the entire nation, but it will mean intercity travel via as well as connections on those intercity buses I mentioned, GO, so the regional network, the TTC, the citywide network, as well as Up Express with connections to the airport. Union is just kind of a mobility powerhouse. There's so many connections that can be made. The station itself features tons of retail and food options. It's directly connected to multiple major sporting arenas, major tourist attractions like the CN Tower. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people work in buildings located directly adjacent to Union Station. It's just an incredible hub. So Union Station is far and away the most important station in all of Toronto. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a lot of fun to kind of look into the connectivity of different stations and kind of rank them in both in our opinion, but also in terms of the straight up amount of service they're getting and the places you can go to from those stations. If you enjoyed the video, leave your comments down below on other cities you'd like us to do top 10 stations for, and as always, have a good night.